Hey, you know that moment when you're coding and you realize you're doing the exact same tedious thing across multiple files?
No, definitely.
Like
Yeah.
maybe you're adding the same line of code to every controller or setting up that initial route, over and over again.
hmm
It can feel like you're just going through the motions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like coding Groundhog Day,
Yeah.
it's all too familiar for many developers.
Yeah. Well, I recently came across this really interesting article. It's in Ruby Stack News from April 11th, 2025.
Okay.
And it talks about a fresh way to automate these kinds of repetitive file changes in Ruby on Rails projects.
Right. And as you said, those repetitive tasks, they aren't just boring. They can also be, well, a breeding ground for small errors, can't they?
Yeah, the kind that can snowball.
Exactly.
And what grabbed my attention in this article was the core idea. Using a tool that's already like baked into Rails.
Uh,
It's called inject into file.
hmm
And using that along with just a simple YAML configuration file to handle all that automation.
Okay, inject into a file. I know that one. It's used by generators, right?
That's the thing. What's fascinating about this to me is that it's taking something that Rails uses under the hood
Mm-hmm.
and bringing it right to the forefront for us developers to use directly.
Precisely. It's about leveraging existing power, but in a new and more accessible way.
Yeah.
So, what do you see as the core questions we need to answer about this approach to really understand its value for our listeners?
That's exactly where this deep dive comes in. Our mission today is to really get to grips with how this method works,
Hmm.
why it's genuinely useful, beyond just saving a few seconds here and there.
Right, the real impact.
Exactly. And what the tangible benefits are for developers like you, people looking to reclaim some time and, frankly, mental energy from this kind of monotonous work.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. What's the real crux of the problem we're trying to solve here? Let's expand on that a bit.
Well, as the article highlights, it's those recurring edits. They really eat away at our productivity and, let's be honest, our patience sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a common scenario. You're adding a root route to your routes.rb file. Something simple like root home hashtag index.
Yep, done that a million times.
Right. Now, if you're setting up multiple similar applications or even just, rapidly prototyping different designs, you might find yourself typing or copy pasting that exact same line multiple times.
That resonates. Or what about controller filters? Like before reaction.authenticate user.
Oh, yeah, classic example.
If you need to ensure that a certain set of controllers require authentication, you're constantly adding that line
Mm-hmm.
over and over.
The article even mentions those little setup lines you might need in various configuration files. It paints a picture of developers feeling like, and I love this phrase,
What was it?
modern-day config monks copying scripture.
Huh. Yeah, that really captures that feeling of mindless repetition. It really does. Just last week I spent, I think, a good hour adding the same error logging setup to 5 different controller files. And I thought, there have to be a better way.
That analogy really hits home, and it underscores the need for a more efficient solution, which brings us to what the article cleverly calls the secret weapon.
Right. The inject into file.
Exactly.
Okay, so inject into file. For our listener who might be familiar with Rails dev, but maybe hasn't really delved into its internal mechanisms, what exactly is this tool?
So inject into file is a method that's part of the Rails framework.
Okay.
Specifically, it lives within the Thor gem.
Thor, right, the task automation thing.
Yeah, that's the underlying framework Rails uses for its generators. And essentially, inject into file gives you the ability to insert content into an existing file at a very specific location.
Okay.
So when you run a Rails generator, like Rails generate controller, Rails is often using inject into file behind the scenes. It's adding things like the route declaration in your routes.rb file,
Right.
or maybe including helper modules in your controller.
So it's not some brand new obscure utility then?
Not at all.
It's a workhorse that's already there, quietly doing important tasks for us.
Pretty much.
The key insight here, as the article points out, is that we can actually take the reins ourselves, leverage this powerful tool directly for our own custom automation needs.
Mm-hmm.
But it needs the right set of instructions,
Good
right?
job.
The right incantation, as they put it. And that seems to be where the YAML file comes into the picture.
Exactly. Think of the YAML file as like the detailed instruction manual for inject into file.
Okay.
Instead of having to write Ruby code every single time you want to make a specific insertion, you can clearly define what you want to inject, where it should go within the file, and how it should be inserted.
And all in YAML.
All in a simple, readable YAML format. Yeah.
That sounds significantly more approachable. Can you walk us through the example YAML configuration that the article provides? Let's make this really tangible for the listener.
Certainly. So the example outlines three distinct file modifications, all defined in this YAML structure. The first one targets the routes.rb file.
Brilliant.
It specifies that the content, let's see, root home hashtag index
Right, the standard root route.
should be inserted after the specific line that contains rails.application.routes.draw do,
Gotcha.
and the message insert after .part. That's just a human-readable label, basically describing the action.
Okay, so it's essentially saying, look for this line in my routes.rb file, and then immediately after it, add this root route definition. That's pretty straightforward. What's the second example showing us?
The second example focuses on the application controller.rb file. Here, the content to be injected is beforereaction.authenticateUser.n.
The authentication filter again.
Yep. And the message this time is insert before, with the target being the line containing end.
So right before the class definition closes.
Exactly. So this will find the closing end keyword of the controller class and insert the authentication filter right before it.
Got it. That's another incredibly common task, isn't it? And this indeed looks like a very clean, very declarative way to handle it.
It is.
And what about the third example?
The third and final example in this snippet targets a file named setup.rb. The content is hashtag setup done here, and the message is simply append.
Just stick it on the end.
Exactly. This one is the most direct. It will just add this line of content to the very end of the setup.rb file. No complex positioning needed.
I'm starting to see the pattern here. It's all about clearly stating the specific file you want to modify, the exact content you intend to add, and then a simple rule for where to add it, either after a particular line, before a specific line, or just tacked onto the end.
Right.
The article really emphasizes the clarity and readability of this declarative approach.
Sure.
What's truly insightful here is how this shifts the focus, right?
Yep.
It moves from the steps required to modify files.
The desired state, exactly.
This declarative approach doesn't just simplify automation, does it? It almost acts like living documentation for the intended configurations.
That's a great way to put it. It makes projects easier to understand and maintain over time. Think of it as codifying best practices in a format you can easily share.
Yeah, like this is how we set up auth, and it's right there in the YAML.
And that's a crucial benefit. You're not bogged down in writing complex logic to pinpoint the exact insertion point. You're simply declaring your intention.
Right.
This makes a configuration much easier to grasp at a glance and also significantly easier to maintain as your project evolves. If you need to adjust what gets injected or the rule, you just make a clear, concise edit to the YAML.
Okay, so we have this YAML file acting as the clear blueprint, the instructions. But how does the magic actually happen? How does Ruby read this YAML and then translate those instructions into actual modifications of our code base? The article mentions a Ruby class called Flexible Injector.
Yes, Flexible Injector. That's the Ruby class that serves as the orchestrator of this whole process.
Okay.
The article provides a concise snippet of its code. At a high level, it begins by requiring the necessary libraries. YAML, obviously, for parsing the YAML file. Makes sense.
And Thor and Thor actions. Now, as we mentioned, Thor is the underlying task automation framework that Rails uses for its generators.
Right.
By inheriting from Thor, Flexible Injector gains access to powerful file manipulation capabilities. Thor actions specifically provides methods for interacting with the file system.
And looking at the code, it seems like Flexible Injector inherits from Thor group and includes Thor.actions. Why is that inheritance and inclusion important here?
Well, inheriting from Thor group allows you to define a sequence of tasks that can be executed together in a controlled way, which is particularly useful if your YAML file defines multiple injections across different files, right?
So it handles them as a batch?
Sort of, yeah. And including Thor.actions is what grants the Flexible Injector class access to a rich set of file manipulation methods, and most importantly for our discussion, the inject and tow file method itself.
Okay, got it. And the core of the operation seems to be within this apply from config method. Can you walk us through what's happening inside that method? Sure. That method is where the YAML file, likely named fileinjections.iml by convention, gets loaded and parsed using YAML.loadFile.
Okay.
This takes the human-readable YAML and transforms it into a Ruby data structure, most likely an array of hashes, where each hash represents a single file injection instruction from the YAML.
Right, like the ones we just discussed.
Right.
Roots, controller, setup file.
Exactly. And then the apply from config method iterates through each of these injection instructions defined in the YAML, right?
It loops through them.
Precisely. For each injection defined, it extracts the essential information, the file path, which file to modify,
Hmm.
the content, the code snippet to inject, and the message which specifies how the injection should occur, insert after, insert before, or append.
Right. And the after or before targets.
Yeah, it also looks for those after or before options to pinpoint the exact insertion location for the insert options.
And once it has all that info for a single injection, it uses that data to actually call the inject into file method.
Exactly right. Based on the message specified in the YAML, it calls inject into file with the corresponding parameters.
So if the message is .insert,
it uses the provided content and either the after or before option to tell inject into file exactly where to put the new content.
and if it's a .append,
Simpler. It just passes the content to inject into file in a way that adds it to the very end of the specified file.
okay.
And importantly, the code also includes a say status method that's part of Thor. It provides feedback in your console about the actions being taken.
Oh, that's good, like inserting into routes.rb or something.
Exactly. Appending to applicationcontroller.rb, it gives you clear visibility into the automation process.
So it's not just silently making changes behind the scenes, it's providing that important feedback, which is always reassuring when you're automating things, isn't it?
Definitely gives you confidence it's doing what you expect.
Now, the article makes a strong case for why this approach is awesome. Let's dig into those benefits. The first one highlighted is that it's declarative. We touched on this, but can you elaborate on why that's such a significant advantage?
Well, think of it this way. Instead of writing code that says, find this line, then add this new line below it, which is imperative.
Right, step-by-step instructions.
You're simply declaring, in this file, make sure this content exists after this other content. The how is handled by the flexible injector.
I see.
Being declarative fundamentally means you're describing the desired outcome, the final state of your files, rather than explicitly detailing the step-by-step process to get there.
Okay.
You don't have to write the tricky logic to locate the correct insertion point. You just tell the system where you want the content to end up.
And that makes it easier to understand.
Much easier to understand and reason about, yeah. And it's less prone to the kinds of off-by-one errors or complex logic bugs that can creep into imperative code trying to do the same thing.
Okay, benefit number 2, it's reusable. How does this YAML-centric approach naturally promote reusability? Across projects, maybe.
Well, because your entire set of injection configurations is stored in a separate, well-structured YAML file.
Right, just text file.
You can very easily reuse that exact same file across multiple different Ruby on Rails projects. Or, even within a larger project, you could have different YAML files for different areas or components.
Oh, interesting. Like a YAML for API setup, maybe another for background job.
Exactly, allowing you to apply consistent sets of changes wherever needed. For example, you might have a standard YAML file for setting up basic authentication that you can just apply to any new API project you start.
That would save a ton of time.
It drastically reduces the need to redefine the same repetitive edits over and over again. Ensures greater consistency, saves time, saves effort in the long run.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, the next point is that this approach is considered safe. And the reason given is that it leverages Thor's well-established inject-into-file method. Why does relying on this existing Rails component contribute to safety?
Well, Thor is, as you said, well-established. It's battle-tested, widely adopted within the Ruby ecosystem, especially within Rails itself.
Been around forever, basically.
Pretty much. The inject-into-file method has been through countless iterations, bug fixes, real-world usage over many, many years.
Okay.
So by building your automation on top of this robust and well-maintained tool, you're essentially inheriting its reliability.
Right.
You're reducing the inherent risks that come with writing your own custom file manipulation logic from scratch, handling edge cases, file encodings, that sort of thing.
Yeah, stuff you don't want to mess up.
You can have a much higher degree of confidence that the file modifications will be performed correctly and without unexpected side effects.
Okay, safer because it's built on solid foundations.
Mm.
The article also highlights that this solution is focused, meaning it provides a targeted approach just for repetitive file injections, without the added complexity of building full-blown Rails generators or, say, intricate Rails engine plugins. Why is being focused a benefit?
Well, sometimes for relatively simple but repetitive tasks like the ones we've been discussing, using a full-blown Rails generator or creating a dedicated Rails engine can feel like bringing a sledgehammer to crack a nut,
Yeah, overkill.
Exactly. Those more comprehensive solutions often come with a certain amount of boilerplate code, added complexity, a broader scope than what you actually need right now. This YAML-fueled approach offers a much more lightweight and specifically targeted solution just for automating file injections.
Hmm.
You're not generating entire files or implementing complex logic. You're simply defining the precise modifications you want to make to existing files.
In a clear, concise way. And finally, the article mentions that this approach is extendable. How can this basic framework for YAML-driven file injections be integrated into broader automation workflows? Or combined with other tools?
Well, because Flexible Injector is essentially just a Ruby class, right?
Mm.
You can very easily incorporate it into other automation scripts, maybe rake tasks, or even larger deployment processes.
Oh, interesting. So you could chain it with other things.
Absolutely. For example, you could create a rake task that first runs your database migrations, then uses Flexible Injector to apply a set of standard configurations from a YAML file, and maybe finally restarts your application server.
Okay, I can see that.
It provides a modular building block that can be seamlessly integrated with other automation tools and processes, helps create more comprehensive and efficient workflows tailored to your specific project needs.
Right, making it part of a bigger picture. Now, the article also glances towards the future. It mentions the author's intentions to integrate this flexible injector concept into their Trix Genius automation companion tool. What are some of the potential implications, the possibilities, that this kind of integration could unlock?
Well, the author envisions leveraging this capability to further streamline a whole range of common development tasks. Imagine being able to completely automate the onboarding process for a brand new project.
Ooh, like setting up a whole new app.
Yeah, by simply running a single command that applies a predefined YAML configuration. It could inject all the necessary default routes, basic controller setups, initial policy files, even some commonly used gem configurations.
Wow, that would be a significant time saver, especially when starting new projects or, bringing new team members up to speed on an existing code base.
Absolutely. Ensuring a consistent baseline configuration right from the start would be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, oh, did you remember to add this?
Exactly. And beyond project setup, it could also be used to consistently enforce coding standards across multiple projects within an organization.
How so?
By automatically injecting predefined code snippets or, say, configuration settings for linters or formatters. Or imagine being able to easily apply common security best practices by injecting the necessary filters and configurations with just a simple command driven by a well-maintained YAML file.
Right. Security configs are often repetitive but crucial.
The potential for automating those tedious yet crucial aspects of project setup and ongoing maintenance is quite vast, and all managed through a single, easy-to-understand YAML file. That's the key part.
So, bring this back to our listener, to you listening right now. Take a moment to consider your own development workflow. What are those repetitive tasks that you find yourself doing again and again in your Ruby on Rails projects?
Think about it.
Is it always adding that same gem to your gem file and then running bundle install? Or maybe making similar modifications to configuration files every time you implement a new feature type?
Could be anything, really.
This approach, utilizing inject into file and the simplicity of YAML, offers a way to just describe those actions in a declarative manner and then automate them, freeing up your time and your mental capacity for more engaging, more complex challenges.
And this raises an important question for you to ponder. How much valuable time and mental energy could you realistically save by automating just a handful of these routine yet essential tasks?
Yeah.
Could you more easily standardize certain aspects of your projects across your team or your organization? This method provides a relatively straightforward yet surprisingly powerful way to achieve exactly that.
Okay, let's bring this insightful deep dive to a close then. Today, we've explored a really practical and I think quite clever method for automating those often tedious, repetitive file changes in Ruby on Rails projects. At its core, it's about strategically leveraging the existing inject into file tool within Rails, but making it significantly more accessible, more manageable, and definitely more reusable through the elegant simplicity of YAML configuration files.
And as we've discussed, this declarative approach offers a compelling set of benefits. You get enhanced reusability of configurations, increased safety by relying on a trusted Rails component,
Right, the Thor stuff.
a focused solution without unnecessary complexity, and the inherent potential for extending it into broader, more sophisticated automation workflows.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it all boils down to reclaiming your valuable time and reducing the mental burden of those monotonous, repetitive tasks that often feel like they're just slowing us down.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on long after this deep dive is over. Imagine if even more of your routine development tasks, beyond just file injections, could be described and executed with simple declarative configuration files like this.
Interesting thought.
What entirely new levels of efficiency and productivity could you potentially unlock in your daily work? This exploration really underscores the power that can be found just by looking closely at the tools you already have at your disposal, and creatively finding new and more efficient ways to apply them to solve those everyday development challenges. Makes you think, doesn't it?